ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم والحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين بالقاسم المصطفى محمد ثم الصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين إلى قيام يوم الدين أما بعد صلوات على محمد وآل محمد Mu'mineen, mu'minat, brothers and sisters in Islam and Iman, Salamun alaykum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, it's an honor to be with you, mu'mineen, mu'minat here. This is my first time serving the Az-Zahra Islamic Center here in Kansas. I appreciate the kind invitation and for all of your attendance, especially on this wonderful, auspicious night where we are celebrating first and foremost, the birth anniversary, the Wiladat anniversary of our fourth Imam, Imam Zain ul-Abideen, alayhi salatu wassalam. You know, whenever we think about the personality of Imam Sajjad alayhi salam, even though it's a wilada, it's an Eid, it's a celebration, the difficulty is whenever we think about him, our mind jumps to the tariq and the history right away. The minute we think about Sayyidul Sajideen, we cannot remove him from Karbala. We can't take away the bala and the difficulties that he had to deal with post-Karbala either, right? Whether it was on the way, Kufa, Sham, back to Medina, all of this. And, you know, we can, from one perspective, study the history about what took place. I don't want to do that tonight. I'm sure most of you probably know all of this already. What I'd like to focus on, you know, in this one night, the few minutes that we have together, is to reflect on something that, you know, very interestingly, how we have all of these wonderful birth anniversaries, right, in starting off the month of Sha'ban, and right in the middle, I don't think I need a tape measure, but thank you. MashaAllah. Then right in the middle, next week, we celebrate the birth anniversary of the Imam of our time, Imam al-Mahdi, Ajjalallahu ta'ala faraju sharif. So we start the month, right? And again, we prepare this for the month of Ramadan as well, right? We start off remembering the personalities in Sha'ban, Imam Hussein alayhi salam, Hazrat Abbas, and then Imam Sajjad. And then we go towards Imam Mahdi, and then we move on towards Ramadan. And these personalities, these four personalities, they hopefully should make us reflect and remember and think about the various difficulties that they had gone through. You know, a lot of people, a lot of Shias, they say, you know, we get it, we hear this stuff every year, we know the history, we don't deny that, but sometimes we're still kind of amazed, surprised of how so-called Muslims could allow these heinous acts to have been committed during their lives. You know, even if somebody wasn't a quote-unquote Shia back then, if they were a basic Muslim and they had love for the Ahlul Bayt, they understood that they're connected to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa Ahmad. You know, how can people like that unsheath their sword and go and attack and kill individuals like this? How can they plot and plan against people like that? How is it possible? How can you have individuals who, on that fateful afternoon, on Ashura, people were crying as they held a sword and shot arrows at the Ahlul Bayt. Right? This is a very ajib, strange thing for somebody to say, I have love and respect and I honor you and I know your forefathers, but I'm ready to kill you. And a lot of us think we're in a privileged position. Alhamdulillah, we are, that we have been given and taught the love of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, that we hold tight to the wilayah of the Ahlul Bayt. But sometimes that leads to a little bit of arrogance once in a while too. What do I mean by that? You know, these same individuals who existed at the same time at Ghadir, at Saqifa, in Karbala, at the time of every single one of the Imams, they must have thought the same things that you and I did. That I understand these personalities, I know who they are, and I have love for them too. But when the Imams needed that support, you see that their doors were closed, locked, and they were nowhere to be found. And as we prepare for the Dhuhr of our Imam, which we want to come soon, we want to make sure we're on the right side. We don't want to just pay lip service to the Ahlul Bayt and say, Allah, I'm reciting Dua Faraj and I'm doing all of this and I'm praying for the Imam to come back. It's okay. But how beneficial is that, asking the Imam to return, if eventually when he does come back, I'll be on the opposite side? We want to make sure that on these types of occasions, on these nights, as we reflect upon the great faza'il and the virtues and the characteristics of the Ahlul Bayt, we also make sure that, hey, what were the characteristics, the negative ones, the spiritual deficiencies that actually kept people away from the Ahlul Bayt as well too? Especially those whom we call munafiqeen, hypocrites, who said that they would love and follow and die for the Imams, but were never to be found when they needed the support. And it's so sad when you look at the hadith. The fourth Imam himself narrates, according to one report, after he had returned back to Medina. And people were asking, okay, after all of this, you see that there's so many people who are ready to support you and fight against the Yazid and the Umayyads, la'natullah alayhim ajma'een. Like, okay, let's go. Let's go stand up. Let's start a revolution. And the Imam would reply to these individuals and say, Ma bi Makkah wal Medina 20 rajulan yuhibbuna. There's not more than maybe 20 individuals in Makkah and Medina that actually have love for us, meaning love for the Ahlul Bayt. 20 individuals. After all that the Ahlul Bayt had gone through and how people had shed tears and understood the dhulm and the oppression of the Umayyads. And it gets even worse. According to hadith from our sixth Imam, Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam, he's reported to have said that ارتد الناس بعد الحسين عليه السلام إلا ثلاثة. He says after Imam Hussein, meaning after Karbala, every single person, every Muslim became a murtad. It's like as if they left Islam, إلا ثلاثة, except for 3 individuals. This is how bad it got, right? This is coming from Imam Sadiq. This is not some exaggeration, right? Imam Zain ul-Abideen is trying to be kind and say, yeah, there's 20 people maybe who love us. But Imam Sadiq, later on, when people were asking him as well, why didn't they support Imam Hussein? Why didn't they support your grandfather? Why didn't they support your father? What's happening? He says, everybody just kind of left Islam. Not really. They still said, La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. They said their shahadatain. But in reality, when it came to the most important bunyad and fundamental aspect of Islam, which is wilayah, they were nowhere to be found. So he says, yeah, they're murtad, they're gone. It's as if they're not even Muslim anymore. This is the situation that the Ahlul Bayt had to deal with. So you and I need to make sure that we are not in those kind of positions. When the Imam does return, we need to make sure we're at the forefront of his soldiers, his supporters, and his army. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. It's okay. How do we do that, right? So there's a few things we should understand about the situation we are in, especially here, in North America, in America specifically. Most of you know generally how centers like this and other masajid, have developed over time. People who have emigrated from various countries, 60s, 70s, 80s, built places like this or bought properties initially for azadari, for aza, and then gradually they expanded programs, right? That's generally the history in America and Canada and to some degree Europe as well. And alhamdulillah, this has given Shias a basic foundation for solidifying that Shia identity that we all need, right? Not without issue, right? But they did the best they could, and alhamdulillah, we at least have something right now. Now, one of the issues that we see is that over time, there was an issue from people leaving the so-called Muslim world or the Muslim civilization, whether it was Pakistan, or whether it was, if you consider it a Muslim country, obviously there's a debate about that if you want to debate that. You're talking about Iran, talking about Iraq, anywhere in the Arab world, Afghanistan, any place, right? It's generally considered a part of the greater Islamic civilization or a Muslim country with some semblance of a Muslim culture. And then our parents or grandparents, they end up over here and they carry on what they feel is correct and right to, and what would have worked over there, they try to establish it over here too. Then people like me, or maybe like your own children, or maybe now some of you who are older who have your own children, they're born here, they're being raised here, and they're coming to you and they're asking questions and you have no idea what they're talking about. You have no idea how to address the questions that they had. even when I was younger, I mean, Maulana Beg, you guys are very lucky to have him, by the way. He was, one of my first teachers in the first teacher I had in Islamic studies. And even before that, he was, I believe, the first alim that ever came to our center where I grew up in New Jersey. First one who actually came and delivered separate English lectures, right? Sheikh Beg was. And I remember even back then, and I don't know if he remembers this, but I was young at that time. And, it was interesting. Somebody was reciting English and, fluent English, not broken English, fluent English. And I went to him after one of the lectures. He said, you can ask questions. So I asked him a question. And again, he's, alhamdulillah, very humble, very knowledgeable, very eloquent, sheikh. So I asked him about the nature of Allah. I said, I was maybe 10, 11, 12, something like that. And something at that point had even bothered me. I said, I get it. Allah is all-powerful. He's the creator. Okay, I get it. But, all right, where did Allah come from? Like, who made him? I don't get that. Again, as a 10 or 11-year-old, I'm asking him. And Maulana Beg probably has never dealt with a, but the me's 12, to a 10, 11-year-old like me. And it's like, okay, how do I answer this? He says, okay. And he stops. I see him thinking and reflecting. You've seen him get into that deep reflection sometimes. So he stopped and he was thinking. He says, okay, imagine you have a rubber ball. I was like, okay. So you take that ball and you throw it at the wall. I was like, okay. He's like, what happens? I'm like, it bounces. Like, yeah, it bounces off the wall and it comes back to your hand. And I started to see him like thinking as he's speaking. I'm like, okay. And he stops and says, come back to me in like 5, 10 years and I'll give you an answer then. He was trying to formulate an answer as he was coming, but he had never really dealt with that question. People in the East, in the Islamic world, or even in the East in general, people don't question Tawheed. They don't ask questions about Allah. They don't debate and say, where did the Quran even come from? How do we know it's from Allah? These kind of essential questions people don't talk about. And because back then, or in those eras, in those countries, nobody really needed to because it was obvious. It was musallam. We understand it. It's clear. And that idea sometimes by so-called sheikhs or maulanas, whatever, is that if you ask a question, then it's wrong. You shouldn't be asking in the first place. Sometimes we get that little slap on the side. Oh, no, you're not allowed to ask these questions, which is the most un-Islamic way that somebody could respond because we're obviously encouraged to ask as many questions as possible. But, some people, because they can't answer something, what do? They start to put up a front and say, no, you're not allowed to ask that question. When you never see the Ahlul Bayt ever say anything like that. What does this have to do with our topic? When we're talking about the issues that we face here, when we're looking at the statistics of Muslim Americans, if we're using that category, right now, if you look at most surveys, they say that people, as Muslims, when they self-identify as a Muslim in a survey and they agree to offer a response, from that pool, they say maybe only 40 to 45% are actually practicing Muslims, meaning praying, hijab, whatever it happens to be. The only time that number actually changes is in the month of Ramadan. Then the number, mashallah, shoots up to almost 70, 80%, which is a good thing that, because of the power of the month of Ramadan, it goes up like that. But our concern is, why is the number so low? Why is there only 40, 45% of, quote unquote, somebody who says, I am a Muslim, but they're not even practicing? But what is going on over here? All right, so that's what I want to kind of go in deeper and explore, inshallah. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. This question, there's a lot of ways we can answer it, a lot of ways the ulama have approached it. I want to go from if you'll bear with me, if you have some patience, from a bit more of a self-reflective, almost like a metaphysical or philosophical lens. So we're going to have to think about this a little bit. When you are asked by somebody else, they say, who are you? Identify yourself. Tell me about yourself. How do you and I respond to a question like that? Sometimes, right off the bat, sometimes we'll respond with our ethnic background, right? They say, tell me about yourself. Give me some information. We'll say, okay, I'm Pakistani, I'm Afghan, I'm Iraqi, I'm Iranian, I'm etc. And we'll give ethnic background. That usually is a marker that people will give, right? Maybe their name might be the first thing, but this will be something secondary. Or another very famous way, tell me about yourself, tell me who you are. What do other people do? They give their occupation, right? Okay, I'm a lawyer, I'm a doctor, I'm a cat food taste tester. I don't know, whatever your job is, I don't know. You mentioned something because you're defining yourself like that, right, to everybody else. Sometimes people want to identify themselves by other labels. And, especially if a conversation goes, politics, right? Everybody's favorite subject starts to come into the question. Okay, what are you, Democrat, Republican, what are you? And they'll ask, and, you're kind of forced to respond like that as well. Or they'll say, if they find out about your religion, you're a Muslim. Okay, so are you a conservative Muslim, or are you progressive, or are you moderate? What are you? There's this idea that we have, and that other people have, is that everything about our identity needs to kind of fit in these boxes, right? It's either this way or that way, right? Either you're progressive or you're conservative. Either you're blue or red, meaning Democrat or Republican. It's always in these kind of black and white binaries, right, when we're thinking about it. And the reason we do that is because it makes things very easy for us. If somebody says, I'm a Republican, or I voted for Trump, I can put them in a little box that I have in my mind about everything that I believe. Somebody who votes for Trump, that's what they're like. Somebody who's a Republican, that's what they're like. Or the other way, if somebody says, no, they voted Democrat, right, for Harris. I said, okay, I know what Democrats are like. I know what somebody who votes for them is like, so I'll put that in my mind too. It makes it easier for us. That way I don't have to do a lot of extra work and find out, details about this person's life. We don't have time for that, apparently, right? What is this all going down to? This society has this disease where it tries to limit the way that we think about things. It's trying to make us reduce the complexities in people's identities, even in pop culture, right? Even when you watch movies, TV shows, media, all sort of good and bad is broken up and divided into only like two categories. Either you're good or you're bad, right? Either good guys or bad guys. If you're into Star Wars, it's either Jedi or Sith. You don't get a choice, right? There's nothing. If you're really into Star Wars, you know that there isn't in between. There's gray Jedi, there's dark Jedi. There's a lot of other stuff too, but that's only if you're a Star Wars nerd like me. If you're into Transformers, there's only two factions, right? Either Autobots or Decepticons, that's it. If you guys ever played Assassin's Creed, I don't know how many of you guys are gamers here, but it's either Assassins or Templars, right? There's only two sort of factions you can choose. That's a lot of stuff that goes on there in the media. It's only two. That's all you get to choose from. But that is not how reality actually functions. Even if you think about our own identity, right? Forget now answering other people. Think about who you and I really are. What am I really? A lot of times if we're pushed, we might say, okay, I think I am a Muslim American, or I'm an American Muslim, right? We might say something like that. Now, why would we give an answer like that? Let me explain a bit more. If you can recite another salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. We answer in that kind of way, meaning some people might just say Muslim, but some people might want to add on American Muslim, or add the word American either before or after. Why do they do that? And they may not recognize this, but sometimes there's many reasons, but at least one of the major reasons is that there is actually deep down in some individuals this idea that, yes, I am Muslim, that's only a small part of me, or some part of me. But there's another part of me that happens to be this thing called American, that has all of its own set of values as well too. Now, some of you might object and say, all right, but it's not a separate thing. Why can't you just be both? What's the problem? Well, okay, yeah, there's a lot of things that maybe are the same, maybe will coincide and will come and converge together, sure. But there are going to be areas where they diverge, where there's going to be differences, right? Let me just give one example, because I don't want to draw this out too much. But when we talk about something like freedom of speech, when you say that in an American context, that has a very specific meaning. From an American perspective, or even a Western perspective, or a secular perspective, if I say I believe in freedom of speech, that means I have to support, I have to defend somebody who draws disgusting cartoons about Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Right? If you believe in freedom of speech and expression and art and all of that, that means I have to be okay and defend and protect somebody who writes and draws disgusting things about any of our prophets, any of the imams, or any other religion's prophets or imams. I have to be okay with things like that. But that's the way it is. I have to be okay with people going and marching in the street, spewing hate against other people. Oh, I'm okay with that. But is this the Islam that you and I should be practicing and thinking? Is that a value that Islam has? Absolutely not. And this is just one example. There's many other categories as well too, where we do not align like that. All right? Just to give you the backup for the freedom of speech idea, right? In Surah Al-An'am, Surah 6, Ayah 108, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَلَا تَسُبُّ الَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ. Do not do not curse, do not insult those who call other than Allah. Allah in the Quran was very specific to the Muslims there, that look, even though the mushrikeen are your enemies, even though people are worshipping idols, don't start insulting them. Don't insult their idols either. Why? فَيَسُبُّ اللَّهَ عَدْوَى بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ. Because they're going to start insulting Allah too, because that's how it is, right? Fight fire with fire. You start coming out harshly against them, they'll fight back against you too. So this is very clearly, no, I'm telling you Muslims, I'm not giving you freedom of speech. I want you to control your speech. I want you to have higher standards and levels of this. Now what is this point here? The point is that, and this is one example, that being in this society, whether we've immigrated here, or born and raised here, has left us with some questions and problems in terms of our identity. We might say Muslim, I believe in Islam, La ilaha illallah, but when some other questions come about, especially when they're socio-political, then sometimes I take that Islam and I put it in my pocket and some other version comes out. Sometimes it's the American version, right? Where I say, yeah, freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom XYZ, or justice, liberty, the American way, whatever you guys say, red, white, and blue, sure. Sometimes it's, no, my Pakistani identity comes out and Islam will sit in the back seat. Right? This is how we did things in, my home village. This is the way that it worked. So I don't care if Islam says that's not the way it works. I'm going to put this ahead of it too. All of this underscores what we call an identity crisis, is that many of us being here, leaving our original countries, being born and raised over here, we're all suffering from an identity crisis. We don't know who we really are anymore. We might say Muslim, we might say Mu'min, we might say Shia, just like they did back in those days around the time of the Ahlul Bayt. But when we're actually asked about our beliefs, when we're actually tested, when we're supposed to explain, we end up taking sides with somebody else and defending somebody else's belief system. So what we want to make sure is we have to solve this issue and figure out how this identity crisis came about. Right? And again, there's many other examples too. Whenever the LGBTQ issue, the rainbow, all that issue comes out, these pronoun issues that are coming out, gender fluidity, all these new issues that come out. Last year, what was it? Was when Roe v. Wade was overturned. People were saying, what is Islam about, my body, my choice? Is it, pro-life, pro-choice? What is it? People said, the Quran is there, the riwayat of the Ahlul Bayt, our ahkam is there. Our position should be clear, but you still see people, we're not sure. And Muslims, practicing Muslims, those who are calling themselves Muslims and Mu'mins and Shias, we're on different sides of this. Right? So that means that there's something about our identity which is a little shaky. And there's a crisis that we need to address. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Now, it should be obvious that if I'm calling myself a Muslim, then that should mean that I'm obeying Allah. Right? It's very simple. Whatever Allah wants, that's what I do. But even in the words of the Ahlul Bayt, there's a difference between a Muslim and a mu'min. They're not the same thing. Right? One level is higher than the other. This one comes, for example, from the fifth Imam, Imam Muhammad al-Baqir alayhi salatu wassalam. He's reported to have said, Al-Islam iqrar bila amal. Says Islam, meaning being a Muslim, is just what? Iqrar, meaning I can say stuff, bila amal, but I don't really act on it. So I'll say that, I believe this Quran is the truth, but maybe I don't act on everything there. I believe in Islamic modesty, but I actually don't perform it. I believe that, this food or this thing is harmful, but I actually go and do it. I don't really care so much. But what? Wal iman iqrar bil amal. What is iman? What does it mean to be a mu'min? A mu'min, at a stage which is higher than a Muslim, is somebody who says, I believe in this stuff and I act upon it as well too. I believe in La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah Adin Waliullah, and then I act upon all of that as well too. It's not just something that's coming out of my mouth. It's I believe and I'm acting. And the Quran says, Sami'na wa ata'na. We hear, we obey. That's what a mu'min does. But obviously there's a gap between us sometimes where we say Muslim, we might even claim that we have iman, I'm a mu'min, but our actions, right, they speak louder and they say something else. So how is that happening? How did we end up in this situation? What is happening that I can say in one breath, I'm a Muslim, but when I'm confronted in a specific situation, I end up doing something directly against what Allah wanted, right? A guna, a ma'asiyah, a sin. Why is something like that happening? How can I say, I believe in Allah, I know that He exists, He's a creator, He's all powerful, all of this, and I know that He's told me, for example, I'll use an example of let's say, profanity. I know that Allah says I'm not allowed to use inappropriate, profane language. I know that. So I know that and I believe in Allah, and I know that I'll be held accountable if I say something I shouldn't. And then something happens, I get upset, or I get angry, or I get hurt, where I'm just casually talking to somebody because it's the way people talk here. And what happens? Again, in one breath, I've already said, I know I believe in Allah and I'm accountable, and then I just drop these disgusting words as if I don't care what Allah says. Deep down, what is happening really is, it's shirk. Hidden shirk is what they call it. And what we're saying is that Allah, I understand that you exist, and I understand you have a bunch of rules. That's great. I just don't feel like doing it right now. And right now I feel like doing what I want to do. So instead of obeying you, I'd rather obey myself. That's what's happening in all these instances. It's a little bit of micro shirk that happens in all these things. But you and I obviously don't want to do something like that. So we kind of have to figure out what is that essential disease, not the symptom, but what's the disease that's leading up to something like that. And that issue is identity loss, right? It's a crisis that we're having, and in that moment, I'm losing it. I'm saying, okay, Allah's there, I'm responsible to Him, I have my duties, I could be punished and I can be rewarded, X, Y, Z, but then my action goes a different direction. So it's as if Allah doesn't even exist then. Why does that loss take place? I want to explain through an analogy. Since I already mentioned like pop culture and things like that, and I'd like to explain things using pop culture because I think it helps some people get the point across. I want to use a reference from a superhero. Most of you probably know from DC Comics, there's a very famous character called Superman, right? How many of you have an idea and are aware of a character named Superman? Right? Jen, okay, a couple of you. So, I'll give another one after this in case you don't know, it's okay. And for those who don't understand this analogy, afterwards you can go ask all these guys for a tafsir and they'll give you the tafsir afterwards, inshallah, right? Okay. So I'm going to ask you some questions, you give me the responses, right? Okay. So, Superman, where is he from? MashaAllah. Right? So I heard a bunch of Kryptons, but I heard somebody else say a different answer too. Yeah, somebody said Kansas. All right, there we go. Or from Smallville, right? Yeah. So, yeah. You're going too deep into it. That's where after the lecture we talk about the deep stuff, yeah. So, typically when people hear about this character, Superman, they say, yes, his real name is Clark Kent, right? And this other name, this hero name is Superman. He's from Kansas or Smallville, whatever. But that's not where he's really from. He's really from Krypton, right? And again, this is the mini history for those who care or don't care, that he was an alien as a baby sent by his parents on a dying planet from Krypton, sent over here to the US, right? Or to Kansas, or to Earth, but ends up in Kansas. So, okay. Now, was Superman always Superman? Like when he was a baby, that he just put on a cape and goes and like fights bad guys? No. So what happens later on in his life, now again, depends on, there's a bunch of different universes, there's different iterations of Superman, I don't want to get too deep into it, but most say that he started figuring out and learning about his powers, right? Flight and super strength and super speed and, heat vision, all of that stuff. He figures it out in middle school, high school, right? Which is probably the worst time to figure out you have a new set of powers, right? So he figures out all of this stuff, and then what happens? Even when he learns about the powers, he doesn't immediately put on a cape and go fly around and beat up bad guys. No, he doesn't do that. What does he do? He freaks out. He starts stressing out and saying, I don't like this. He tells his parents about it, and he says, I don't want this. Why can't I be normal like everybody else? What's wrong with me? Right? He doesn't want this. Okay. Now, keep those in mind. When we talk about our origin, where we're from, sometimes we give an answer like some might give and say, Superman, Clark Kent, is from Smallville. He is from Kansas. But that's not actually where he's from. That's not his real origin. That's not the origin that defined his purpose, right? It's his parents who sent him down that defined that purpose. His origin is back there in Krypton. When you and I think about our origin, sometimes we think in very small terms, right? Okay, yeah, I'm here from Kansas, or I'm from America, or I'll go back to my country of origin. I'm from Pakistan, India, Iraq, Afghanistan, Iran, whatever. But we're thinking in very small dunyawi materialistic terms. That's not where we're from. In reality, that's not where we're from. Where are we actually from? From Jannah. And the creator of Jannah, where are we really, really from? And Allah reminds us constantly. He says, you know what? You insan, you're going to forget this. You're going to think you're from over here. You're going to have this identity crisis and think that you're from earth and you're going to become too earthly. But I'm going to give you reminders every time I take a soul back. Every time when you learn about somebody returning to me. Every time you put somebody in the ground, I'll make you repeat over and over again what? Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. What is that first part? Inna lillah. We're from Allah. Allah's saying, you're going to forget that you're coming from me. You're going to forget your divine origin, and I want to give you this reminder. And I'm like, why is that important? Of course we all know we're from Allah. Not practically. Yeah, somewhere in the back of our mind we know that. But like we said, when we have to make these decisions, when we get to that crossroads, we forget Allah really quick. He says, that's why I'm in death, I'm giving you these reminders over and over again, because you will be forgetting that. All right, so that's origin. Now, Superman, Clark, why isn't he just becoming Superman right away? Well, there's 3 factors why he didn't initially want to become the superhero. And there's 3 things that we want to go through, inshallah. If you can recite, as-salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So, the first is this. He's not raised by his Kryptonian parents, right? Who was he raised by? Jonathan and Martha Kent were from Smallville, Kansas, the ones who actually found his spaceship and found him. So he's raised by Earthlings. So can Earthlings ever really give a superpowered human, superpowered alien, like teach them what their purpose is in life? It's not going to happen. And according to some versions at least, they tried to hide him all the time and say, no, don't fight crime, don't do anything, just be a normal person. The first factor that affects you and I, that has affected you and I, and that continues to affect the kids that grow up in this society, is you and I as parents. We might want our kids to be good Muslims, good mu'mineen, good Shias, practicing all of this, but if we raise them more for the dunya than for the akhirah, then they're going to remember that and they're going to act upon that. There are some parents that they might say, I want my kid to recite Quran, I want them to recite poetry, I want them to, wear hijab like this, XYZ. They have a whole list of the perfect Islam that they want. But if you look for that same Islam in the house between the mother and father, it doesn't exist. You cannot give what you don't have. Basic principle in metaphysics, right? فَاقِدُ شَيْءٍ لَا يُعْطِيهِ. You cannot give it if you don't have it. You can say one thing to your child, I want you to read Quran. They'll say, Mama, Baba, I've never seen you read Quran in your life. And you want me to recite it? It's not going to happen. You can't preach. You can't force them to do that. I want you to read your salah, your namaz on time. Okay, but I see you, after you come back from work, you're tired, and you go and sit and watch TV or whatever, you're on your phone for a couple hours, or you go and eat first and then you go pray. Why do I have to go right on time, awwal al-waqt, if you don't do that? Assuming the parents even pray at all. And most of us know, especially anybody who has background in child psychology and things like this, especially early developmental, everything in that initial phase, 0 to 7, which is mentioned in our riwayat as well, everything is not about a parent telling their child what to do. It's all observational learning. We say monkey see, monkey do, right? If the child sees it, they'll do it. They'll copy it. And that's why you see young children, babies, infants, toddlers, when they see their parents praying, they go run towards that janamaz and that musalla. They'll run and do that there. They'll act these things out. They'll pretend to recite poetry. They'll pretend to recite the Quran if they see their parents or their siblings do something like that. So if we want them to do that, we have to create the environment too. So sometimes that means we have to reform ourselves and change ourselves if we want our children to do better. If I want my child to be a super Shia, I need to become a super Shia first. And yes, some of us, we have delayed onset Shiism, right? It happens to a lot of us. We're reborn. Maybe we weren't practicing early on, right? Like I wasn't practicing when I was a younger kid. I wasn't, was raised differently. And it's something I picked up a bit later on in life. So some of us, even as parents, we're trying to slowly improve. But we have to show that effort off to our children because that's where they're going to learn everything from. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. One more point about this before we go on to the second one. There are some parents who, again, they say a lot of things, but in practical language, they put focus and emphasis on something else. So, every single parent over here is telling their child they need to focus, do your homework, and do well in school, right? Every parent's doing that. If your child asks you, okay, why do I have to do so well in school? Why do I need good grades or a 4.0? Why do I need all this stuff? They say, right, you have to do well in school so you can get into a good college, right? And I say, okay, fine. Why do I have to get into a good college? Why do you have to get into a good college? So you can get a good job, right? Exactly, okay. And then they'll say, why do I need to get a good job? Kyunki shaadi nahi hoegi otherwise, right? Because you're not going to get married otherwise. Nobody wants to marry a deadbeat, that's why. Right? Or what the fathers will tell their beloved daughters, I don't want you to marry a deadbeat, right? And in case that person you marry is a deadbeat, I need to make sure you're educated, right? So you can take care of yourself. Nowhere in that conversation is akhirah mentioned, is taqwa mentioned, is iman mentioned. None of that is mentioned. It's a be successful in the dunya so you can get X, Y, Z. When has a parent ever told their child, look, try your best, do your best, we'll be here to support you. But remember that taqwa and iman has more importance than anything else. If after all of this you decide to get a very simple trade, right? You want to be a day laborer, do something with your hands, blue collar work. You want to do tech school, that's fine too. You want to do something very simple, that's okay as well too. As long as your rizq is halal, it's a properly earned income, as long as you put in everything that you can and you're earning for the akhirah, the other stuff will come, Allah will take care of that. How many parents actually speak to their kids like this? Zero is pretty pessimistic, but yeah, it's few and far between. So we could say we want their Islam and Iman and all of this, but the language we give them is dunyawi language. So then what happens is when they start becoming workaholics and they stop calling us, when they stop spending time with non-Muslims, when they do all of this stuff, who's to blame? Not the non-Muslim friends, not the media, not their phones, not TikTok, none of that stuff is to blame. It's us that we set the wrong behavior, the wrong patterns, and we set the wrong environment there. That means you and I have to change the language that we're utilizing as well. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. That's one factor, is Clark's parents or Superman's parents. Our tarbiyah needs to be Islamic. Not the way that my parents raised me because I don't know any better. Not the way that I think everybody else is doing it. Not because I saw parenting happen in some Bollywood drama or some TV show or whatever, and I'll just copy whatever's there. I need to know how Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam have told me to perform tarbiyah, right? And that requires, we can't really discuss it here because that's a full-on, there's workshops done about Islamic tarbiyah, but it's something that we should look into. Okay, second factor. Okay, even if we put aside Clark's parents, what's the next factor that limited him? Is who is he hanging around with all the time? Earthlings. All of his friends were earthlings, right? So all of his support system, all of his group, were people who didn't have powers. So how could people like this, who don't understand his identity, who don't understand his origin, his destination, his purpose, how can any of them help him along his journey? They couldn't. They held him back instead. That's the second factor, is the friends circle that we have. You and I might want to do better. I want to get closer to Allah. I want to become more spiritual. Wonderful. Look at the people that you surround yourself with. Okay, yeah, you have similar interests in music and movies and TV and you like the same food. Okay, that's great. But are these individuals actually trying to make you better as well too? Are you constantly finding yourself afterwards like, okay, it was fun, but I didn't really benefit from that. And now again, maybe you're not interested in spiritual growth. That's different. But for those of you and us who might be interested, I have to figure out, these individuals around me, are they helping me at all? Or are they holding me back? They say this thing even when somebody's interested in becoming an entrepreneur, starting business. They say, if you actually want to learn the tools of the trade and tips and things like that, you go hang around with successful business owners and entrepreneurs, and then things will rub off. Their disciplines and their habits. So again, about the dunya, we know all this stuff. When it comes to akhirah, like, okay, it doesn't really matter. And sometimes, now again, this is where I am supportive of parents when they're a bit more restrictive of who their friends for their kids are. They should be. Because it's their job to say, look, these individuals, I don't want them in the house because I've seen their behavior. Right? Not that we're judging them or saying that they're going to hell or anything like that. To say, look, it's not good for your spiritual growth. And you have to be able to sit down and discuss this with your children as well too, of why you don't think it's the case. Right? So there has to be some explanation. Or me, as a mature child, hopefully too, I can think and say, look, maybe my friend circle doesn't care so much about this, but maybe I don't belong in the circle anymore. Now, you don't just have to cut off everybody altogether. Maybe you can just reduce the amount of influence they have on you. Maybe you can reduce the amount of time you hang out with them and say, all right, maybe I have to spend a bit more time, find some new friends or spend some time somewhere else. I have to figure out something else. Because if I actually want to spiritually grow, these individuals are not going to let me grow spiritually. They're going to hold me back. So I have to do something on my own, take some initiative, and break out of that. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. There's a few riwayat I wanted to share about the concept of friendship and what have been mentioned, but we're running out of time, so I don't want to go through all of those. So I just want to go on to the last point. The final point is, of course, right, so we had parents so far, we had friends, and the final one, which everybody loves to blame right now, is just the environment, right? Media, social media, all of that stuff. Right? It's the easiest thing to blame. But more importantly, it's the idea of all of those external factors, which, yes, it is the media, it's social media, it's TV, it's pop culture, it's music, it's all of that, but it's also school as well. Most of you, I don't know if there's an Islamic school in this area or not, but many communities you see now, whether Muslim or otherwise, people are pushing away and pulling away from the public schooling system for good reason. Now, I'm not your marja, I'll probably never be your marja, but if I ever was your marja, I would tell you public school's haram, right? Because it's one of the most dangerous places that we could send our children. We're sending them to be educated, to connect with, and make role models out of individuals who are trying to tell your kids, oh, maybe you don't know what your gender is. And kids, and I've had these issues, people have come to me and explained, Maulana, Sayyid, our child, we thought they were doing well in school, and then all of a sudden they came back one day and they started saying some weird stuff about their identity. And, they were saying, in the morning when they left our house, it was our boy. They came back in the afternoon and they said, no, I'm a girl. And then at night they said, oh, I'm a toilet now. This is the way people are doing things. They're just changing their identity into random stuff here and there. And this is the propaganda that other people are feeding them out there. Why would we ever want to put our children and put them in the hands of somebody who are going to do this incorrect tarbiyah? Right? Who are going to take them and destroy their identity. You have to be very, very careful. Now, yes, maybe there's no Islamic schooling here. Maybe the public schools or private schools are better. Whatever it is, everybody's situation is different. I know whether it's homeschooling, private schooling, whatever it is, sometimes these options are not feasible for many individuals, right? We're not judging people like that. But we should understand the beast. We should understand the enemy, right? It's important to know that even if I do have to send my child off to public school, I need to be on top of them as well too. When they come back, you have to be a little annoying sometimes, build up, some relationship. What did you discuss? Did they say anything weird? What happened? And kids, the reason your parents are doing that is they're doing it as a sense of protection because of the weird stuff that's happening out there. So don't get offended, don't be annoyed by it. They're trying to just make sure that nobody's out there trying to mess with your head, trying to mess with your soul. That's it, right? So we should understand that. And, parents, I know it's difficult. Sometimes we have both parents now working. You come back, you're tired. You don't want to deal with your kids' schooling and help them with homework and all of this because you're stressed out. Right? 9 to 5, sometimes 9 to 5. 9 to 5 doesn't even exist anymore because people have to bring their work back with them. Do you have time to sit with your kids and look at the books that they've been given and assigned to read, which are discussing disgusting information inside? Do we have time to sit there and look through their syllabus or curriculum? A lot of us don't have time for stuff like that. But if we are going to make that difficult decision, send them off to somebody else, a non-Muslim, to learn, then it is our job to sacrifice a little bit of our sleep, a little bit of our patience, a little bit of our time, and say, I've got to sit down and I have to look through this stuff. Otherwise, if I don't become preventative, then what happens is after the fact that they're going to come to me and say some weird stuff, and I'll have to be trying to fix it afterwards, which is very, very difficult. And it's probably not going to happen. Right? Prevention's always easier and better than curing, isn't it? So we have to make sure we're on top of that as well. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So those are the 3 factors that can lead to our identity loss as well. Sometimes we have been taught to forget about Allah. Why? Because we've been raised with dunyawi principles, with dunyawi, worldly, materialistic language. The second is that our friends, the people that we surround ourselves with, even colleagues for those who are older, right? Work colleagues, things like that. They're the ones who are not interested in the akhirah. And we constantly see them and hang out with them, and that affects us negatively as well too. And some people say, oh, it's not a big deal, I'm okay. Right? We don't say that for anything else. Right? If, let's say, for those of you who believe that, smoking, tobacco smoke is harmful, we say there's this concept that even if I don't smoke, if it's somebody around me, then we have this idea of second hand and even third hand. Right? That just because I'm not doing it doesn't mean it's, not harmful. Being around it can be harmful as well too. We have the same exact idea when it comes to guna and ma'asiyah, that there is a such thing called second and third hand sin as well. Is being around people who are ahl dunya and ahl al-ma'asiyah, the people of guna, the people of this world, it has an effect on our soul as well too. Because I'm around people who are holding me back. So we have to make sure the people that we sit with, the people that we eat with and talk with, that we learn from, we have to make sure that they are people that we look up to. I should be jealous, a good jealous of their akhlaq and try to improve myself like they are. And the third factor was all the other things around us. Again, I didn't want to spend so much time on social media and stuff like that because we're almost out of time. But there's a lot of other factors involved too. But one of the most important ones is schooling. So if I have the ability to maybe homeschool or private school or Islamic school, any of these things, we should seriously consider stuff like that. Or if I do have to resort to public schooling, I need to put, as parents, we need to make sure we're putting in extra effort and being on top of all of this so that we can prevent rather than have to cure a disease that happens later on. Now, all of this was about the idea of identity. It's how and why we might think we know Allah, but we end up forgetting Him in many instances. There are some other general points too that I'll quickly mention before we end. This ties to a beautiful hadith that is narrated and attributed to Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wassalam. This relates back to the introductory point that we had mentioned. He's reported to have said, Afdalul Iman, Husnul Iqan. That the most afdal, the best, most superior type of iman comes from having excellent yaqeen. Now, yaqeen can come in many different ways. In this society, it ends up coming through rational, logical, sometimes even scientific inquiry, right? One thing that we need to start getting used to and putting effort into, and if we had time we would have done this, but we ran out of time, is re-examining our usul, the usul al-din. We talk about tawheed, we talk about adal, we talk about nubuwa, imama, and we say qiyamah, but technically it's ma'ad, right? Those are the 5 asl usul, and all of those break down to actually only 3. It's Allah, meaning tawheed. Then we have wilaya, which includes nubuwa and imama, obviously. And then afterlife, ma'ad. That's the 3 most important fundamentals that we all need to go forward. Before I have questions about why do we pray like this, why are dogs najis, and why this, those are cool, great questions. Usually those questions happen, and sometimes I get angry or I'm questioning Allah because I don't understand Allah in the first place. A question about the furu' is usually a question about the usul. So it's good practice to go and try to re-obtain some certainty, if I don't already have it, in the usul al-din, starting with tawheed. To say, okay, do I actually and truly and really believe in tawheed? And sometimes that means internally, like, do I actually really believe that there's only one Allah? Do I believe He's Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, and merciful and all of this? That He's the creator? Or do I have some doubts that I need to figure out? If somebody were to come to me, a colleague, a coworker, a classmate, maybe a family member who's not so practicing, and he challenges me and questions me, like, why do you believe in all this Stone Age stuff, right? The world's progressing, we don't need religion anymore. Why do you believe in all this fairy tale stuff? How do I answer that? Sometimes we have yaqeen, we don't need to answer, that's okay. But sometimes that makes us lose our iman a little bit too, right? Like, I wish I had an answer for them. I wish when they asked me, I could have responded to them. So one thing we should, inshallah, work on, and if ever we have time in the future, we can maybe go through some of these things, is to go through the usul al-din, but from a logical and rational lens. A lens and an approach which is different than usually we were born and raised with, that usually Sunday schools might use, or how we were raised in, let's say, Muslim countries. The method that's typically required for this society is more of a rational and logical. Not to say that it's always superior, but it has its place for it, especially this society. It can be helpful and beneficial as well. So, we end over here. Forgive me if I went a little too long. I hope the points that were mentioned here were beneficial. If they were, then all khair comes from Allah, and we thank Allah for this opportunity to be able to take benefit from the words of the Quran and the Ahlul Bayt on a blessed occasion like this, as we commemorate the Wiladat of the Imam. If there was anything that was said which was incorrect, or it was confusing, or it was just offensive to you, then I apologize. Anything like that, a mistake comes from me, and I ask for your forgiveness. If there's something that I need to correct, feel free to come to me afterwards, after the program, or you can take my information from any of the board members who might have it, and then we can exchange, we can contact ourselves there and hopefully provide more information if something was left in an unsatisfactory way. Jazakallah once again for the invitation, for your participation, for your attention. Inshallah khair. We ask Allah by the haqq of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad on this beautiful night to bless us all through the ibadat of our fourth Imam, to give us just a small piece of that type of ibadat and to gain that sort of level. And hopefully that prepares us as we celebrate, inshallah, next Saturday or Friday night, the birth anniversary, the 15th Sha'ban anniversary, as we commemorate and remember our Imam of the time. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala Ahl Baytihi at-Tayyibin at-Tahirin.